Welcome to Conversations Different, the podcast from the Santa Fe, New Mexican, about the interesting people, places, and issues of northern New Mexico. This is Inez Russell Gomez, and today we are talking to historian, author, and Galisteo resident, Dan Flores. He's also host of The American West, a podcast on the MeatEater Network designed to tell a new story of our most fascinating region, and that would be the West. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Inez. Thank you for having me.
What is the new story of the West?
Well, in this particular podcast, what I'm doing is largely a series of scripted readings from my work over the years, mostly the last 3 or 4 books, but articles and talks as well. And what I focused on for a very long time was not the sort of classic cowboys sort of rounding up cattle and going on trail drives and gunfights in Western towns. I've never really done that kind of history. I have written more about the deep history of the American West, which of course is very old. The human story in the West goes back more than 20,000 years, we think. I've written a lot about the wildlife, the animals, the bestiary that evolved here and that came here from other parts of the world, and a lot about the native people. So it's kind of, and sort of much of these stories in that podcast have an environmental focus. So it's a different kind of approach to the American West. You won't get a lot of the standard thing that people think of when they think of Western history. You get a rather different take.
Oh, so no gunfights.
No gunfights, no, and no Indian wars, and none of that. I'm more interested in the relationship that people have to the natural world, and as I said, in the landscapes, the various kinds of landscapes, the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountains, the Great Basin, the Western Seashore, the Badlands of the West. I have an episode that I've just been working on recently on rock art across the West, another one on the origins of our public lands in the West. So it's that kind of focus rather than the standard sort of Marshall Dillon Gunsmoke kind of thing.
What do you think it is about the West that fascinates people so much? Even, I am from here and I went east to go to college in graduate school. And I just remember feeling hemmed in the whole time and I couldn't wait to get home. And there's just something about this part of the world that draws people, it seems.
Well, there's no question about that. I mean, I didn't grow up in the West. My family is from Louisiana. It's one of these really ancient European families that came to the Americas in the early 1700s. And growing up in that part of the world, I mean, I knew about some of my ancestors who were traders to the native people and had gone up the Red River in the direction of New Mexico and traded up and down the rivers there. And so I kind of grew up with a fascination with the West. But when I was 4 years old, my family took me on a vacation into New Mexico and Colorado, and that made an indelible impression on me.
Wow.
I can tell you, I dreamed about blue skies and cotton ball clouds and sand dunes and red cliffs for my entire childhood. And so as soon as I could take a car west by myself, I immediately drove away from Louisiana. And in my adult life, I've only lived in the West. I've lived in West Texas, Montana, and now New Mexico. So I'm very much kind of a converted Westerner, but it's in my bones and blood, I can assure you.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was reading that you think maybe one of the ancestor that came to trade, et cetera, took your name back at some point. How did the Flores name, which is pronounced Flores by people in New Mexico usually, how did your name get to Louisiana? Was it French, or did it come from somebody in New Mexico territory, or do you even know?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it actually has a somewhat long answer, and I'll give you a very abbreviated version of it. when Louisiana was founded by the French in 1714, the Spanish in Texas and New Mexico were so alarmed at the French being there, particularly because they thought that the Red River would access New Mexico, that they founded a presidio in Louisiana 10 miles away from the first French settlement, which is in a town called Natchitoches on the Red River in the central part of the state. And that little presidio had about 20 soldiers in it, and one of them was the ancestor who gave my family a Spanish surname. And because he was a long way away from potential girlfriends in places like New Mexico, he found a French girl in Louisiana and married her. And my family then got absorbed into the French population there.
Yeah.
So that's why the pronunciation of the name is French rather than Spanish.
Oh, that's a great story. And that happens in New Mexico as well, because the French trappers that came down from the north, like, the Ledoux's and the Gentettes and those people all got absorbed. And there's a big joke. If you're from my side of the mountain in Las Vegas area, we say Ledoux's, which is completely incorrect, but that's how they say it. Yeah. But if you're from the other side of the mountain, like the Espanola or the Taos ones, they say Ledoux because they do it correctly. So it's just kind of depends on where you end up and how your name is pronounced. So,
and it's part of this grand old history of the part of the world that we're from. I mean, Louisiana, I can tell you from its very founding, was fascinated with New Mexico. And so there is a connection between the part of the world where I grew up and the part of the world where I now live and where we are that goes back a very long time.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if you know our member of Congress, Teresa Ledger Fernandez, but they say the name Ledger.
Yes.
But it's really Leger because she had French ancestors that walked from Louisiana to come here.
Yes, and I have met her, and we've talked a little bit about that same thing because of the peculiarity of the name pronunciation.
Yeah, I always like seeing her on TV when they pronounce it the French way, and it's like, no, in Las Vegas we said it differently. Yeah. It seems to me that when reading your books, and I heard you speak a couple of years ago at I think it was about the Serengeti, about the long history, but you really tie the land, the people, and the animals together in this really big picture way. How did you grow to see history that way?
I came up in the late 1960s. I graduated from high school and went to college in the late 60s. And so I was on the scene at the time of the first Earth Day and the beginnings of the ecology movement. And because I was in college at that time, I was very much influenced by that. So when I went off to get a PhD, and I wanted to get it, I was an English major as an undergraduate, which is one of the reasons I like to write books like the ones that I write, where I tell a lot of stories and talk about character development and all of that. But I went to get a PhD in history, but the kind of history I was interested in was the history of ecology and the history of the environment. So that pointed me in the direction at a fairly early age in my middle 20s towards doing the kind of stories that I've done in books like American Serengeti and Coyote America and Wild New World, and then in this podcast. As I said earlier, it's a different sort of take on history. It's a focus much more on the relationship between people and the natural world. And I've always been interested in animals. I've always had companion animals. And so I've written a lot about the animals of the American West.
Oh, that's so important because, I mean, you think about the bison and how huge it was for Native people, and then how it almost got killed, extinct. And now it's coming back to some degree, and just all the different things that did with how they ate, but also what happened to the land and to the grasslands. I mean, there's such connections that we used to, in the American world, tried to separate, but really kind of go together.
Well, we, in contrast to the way Native people utilize bison, and by the way, the buffalo hunt by Native people, which went on for 10,000 years here, is the longest economic life way, the longest way that human beings have practiced an economy in North American history. But when Europeans came here, I mean, we brought with us a couple of institutions, Judeo-Christianity for one, that taught that humans were exceptional and everything else was made for us to use, and the capitalist system that converted wildlife into commodities in the market economy. And the result of that was pretty demonstrable in history. For example, in 1800, we think there were probably 30 million bison in the West.
Wow.
By the 1880s, there were only 1,000 of them left. And so this is an animal that had been around for many, many thousands of years. We think probably maybe 400,000 years in America. And in the space of less than a century, it's reduced from 30 million animals down to fewer than 1,000. I mean, that's a really stunning kind of story.
Yeah, that is. Oh, on that note, we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
We make renewable doable. We're positive energy solar for a cleaner, brighter future for all. Positive energy's the right call. Feel good about your energy bill. Help save the planet too. Your trusted solar company, working hard for you. Generate positive energy. Positive energy solar.
We are back with Conversations Different, talking to Dan Flores about the link between history, animals, the West, and I think let's go to one specific animal because his book, Coyote America, has just been re-released this month. What is it about the coyote that made people want to kill it so much, just wipe it out?
Well, I mean, to be specific, it's essentially old worlders who come to America, who really want to kill it, because the coyote had spent 10,000 years before we Europeans came here being regarded as a kind of sacred semi-deity animal by native people. I mean, it was the animal they made into their avatar, their stand-in in the world for human beings. And those stories, those coyote stories that we're all familiar with, were really all about really laying out human nature. I mean, we refer to them as trickster stories, but really the important part is why the tricks worked. And the reason the tricks worked in those stories is because the stories were an effort to elucidate human nature. But when Europeans came without any previous experience with coyotes, because coyotes are not found in Western Europe, they immediately associated coyotes with wolves, which was an animal that people who had been herding livestock for 8,000 years had hated for 8,000 years. And so the coyote, without us knowing really anything about this animal whatsoever, other than the fact that it looked like a small version of a wolf, immediately came in for efforts that started in the 1860s and 1870s, really, when coyotes were being killed as part of the fur trade, and their skins were being used to pass as money in the West. A coyote skin was worth $1 in the 1870s and 1880s and was actually traded as money.
Wow.
But in the 20th century, when we began to offer to the federal government, the Biological Survey, the possibility of resolving the predator question in America, and Europeans had been trying to wipe out predators ever since they had arrived here in the early 1600s, particularly East Coast Europeans had. When the Biological Survey takes on this task, they launch a campaign that's first directed at wolves and uses strychnine poison in government hunters to attempt to wipe wolves out as a boon to the livestock industry in America, which they pretty much successfully do by the 1920s. And once wolves are almost gone, then the federal poisoners turn to coyotes, which they argue are really the arch predator of our time, they say. And over the next, from 1925 to about 1970, we wipe out more than 8.5 million coyotes in America and spend $500 million of taxpayer money trying to do this. And we do it before we ever have ecologists, who are the ones who first start pushing back on this, provide us with information about the role that coyotes have played for millions of years in American history and continue to play in modern America. So it's one of those typically American stories where we kind of come in and we have the idea that we know what's best for the continent, and we're going to wipe these animals out before we know the first thing about them. Yeah. And finally, the science of ecology, and ecologists like Aldo Leopold, for example, will begin to argue that, wow, this is really an insane thing to do, because we're taking out animals that have shaped North American ecology for 1 million or more years. Yeah. So finally, starting in the 1970s, we began to reverse this policy of trying to kill every coyote that we see. But we're still, the federal agency that was long doing that is still killing about 80,000 coyotes a year on behalf largely of the livestock industry.
Oh, that's really, it's beyond unfortunate. It's tragic, because when you take a species out of its place in the natural world, something else happens, and we never seem to care about those unintended consequences. When we didn't have coyotes, what went wrong?
Well, what happened, and we weren't able, I mean, this is one of the great things about the coyote story, and it's one of the reasons I had so much fun writing Coyote America, because this is one of those instances where nature wins in the end. The coyote had evolved a series of adaptations actually to being harassed by wolves, because the bigger wolves often harass coyotes, that coyotes employed whenever we started trying to wipe them out. And the result then of this effort actually didn't wipe coyotes out. What it did was to spread them out of the West across all of North America. Because one of those adaptations that coyotes have whenever they're being pressured and harassed is something called fission fusion. And it's an adaptation that allows coyotes to exist in a fusion form, in other words, as a pack. But when they're harassed, they split, they fission apart into singles and pairs. And when that happens, they colonize. And with wolves wiped out east of the Mississippi River, that opened up a niche for a mid-sized canid predator east of the Mississippi. And so, I mean, this is how I got fascinated with coyotes in the first place. I was growing up a young teenager in Louisiana in the 1960s when coyotes were first showing up there. And I got intrigued about why coyotes were in the bayous of Louisiana and began doing research on it and realized, wow, this is what's happened. Wolves are gone. Coyotes are filling that niche. And because there's an effort to wipe them out in the West, they're spreading across the entire country. So that's kind of one of the big stories. It's manifest destiny in reverse in a way. Mm-hmm. It's coyotes spreading eastward into the rest of America. And one of the things I tell in this new version of Coyote America is that coyotes now are about to become the first mammal in 3 million years to cross from North America through the Isthmus of Panama into South America. They are actually about to colonize South America. And this is happening any day now. They've been expanding 40 miles a year through Panama and are now in the Darien Gap, Darien National Park, with Colombia and South America right on the other side.
Oh, that is fascinating. It just shows you that life wants to adapt and change and will do what it needs to do to survive, if possible. We live on an arroyo, so I see them pretty often in town. So I've never thought about them going away just because they've always been part of life. But it sounds like there was a concerted effort to just wipe them out.
Oh, there was. Yeah. Starting with an act passed by Congress in 1931 called the Animal Damage Control Act. this federal agency, it's the agency that became the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, although it had a particular division that was devoted to wiping out these animals that were considered to be unhealthy and unsatisfactory. They, from that point in 1931 to 1971, when, of all people, President Richard Nixon ended poisoning coyotes on the public lands with a presidential proclamation, we think they killed 8.5 million coyotes. And as I said a minute ago, spent $500 million of taxpayer money trying to do it. I mean, there were people who came back from World War II who said things like, okay, we've defeated the Germans, we've defeated the Japanese. Now the next step is to defeat these damn coyotes.
Oh, the Roadrunner cartoon hadn't gotten popular enough yet for people to kind of like the coyote a little bit.
No, well, you're exactly right. I mean, Wile E. Coyote did sort of give everybody in America who watched those cartoons a coyote you could identify with, because he, of course, so personifies much about us humans. It's very much in the way that the coyote of the Native American stories did.
Yep. Some of our best and worst qualities. On that note, we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Looking to reach a wider audience and grow your business? For 175 years, the Santa Fe New Mexican has been the trusted voice of Santa Fe, with unmatched local reach in print and online. In addition to our long-standing, independent, family-owned newspaper, we have a full-fledged marketing team with the expertise to help you succeed in the 21st century. From traditional print to precision targeted digital advertising, we have the tools to connect you with your ideal customers. Partner with us and see the results for yourself. Advertise with the Santa Fe New Mexican and unlock your business's full potential. Visit us at santafenewmexican.com/advertising or call us at 505-995-3852. Thank you.
We are back with Conversations Different, talking to Dan Flores about history. And now I want to focus on a particular part of the West, which is the Santa Fe region, and your kind of love affair with it over the years and how you finally ended up here. I loved reading that you had rented an apartment above the Jean Cocteau, and you get a call and you have to go take a job in Lubbock.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I wrote about this. I mean, it's actually going to be a part of the next book I'm doing, but I wrote a magazine. The editors there wanted to know why I had come to Santa Fe. And so I told them this. Actually, it's a fairly, long involved story where I started coming to New Mexico in the middle of the 1970s when I was in graduate school and fell in love with Santa Fe. I'd gone all over the West on road trips, and I decided this was the very best part of the West. And I got a PhD in the summer of 1978, and I did not have a job. So I went on a road trip, and I was somewhere out in southern Utah. And I'm footloose and fancy free. I can live anywhere I want to live. I think I'm just going to move to Santa Fe. And so I drove back from Utah through Santa Fe and rented a little apartment above the Cocteau Theater, and then drove back to Texas where I was doing my graduate work and was getting ready to move to Santa Fe in August of 1978. And a university called me out of the blue 2 weeks before classes started and said, "So are you still interested in taking a job with us?" And my first reaction was, no, I've already rented a place in Santa Fe. And then I thought, I've just spent much of my life preparing for an academic career as a professor, so maybe I should take this position. So it was a job at Texas Tech. And so I moved to Lubbock, and I was there for the next 14 years of my career before I finally managed to escape West Texas and spent most of my academic career at the University of Montana.
That's a great story. So you started teaching my freshman year at Tech.
Oh, is that right?
Yep.
I knew you were there, Inez. Yeah.
Yep. 78 was when I started, and 82 graduated and went off to the world. And I was thinking about it. I don't think I've spent more than 2 nights in Lubbock since I left. Even though I think it's a great place to have gone to college, and I appreciate it a lot. And I think about it now in terms of what you teach, history. I mean, Texas A&M is getting strange about syllabi and whether you can mention gender or ethnic things in their classes. Tech has gotten the same bandwidth. I don't know how people are teaching right now in those colleges.
I mean, I feel the same way. I retired from the University of Montana 10 years ago, so I could just write full time, and have watched in some horror at some of the things that have happened in the university world, especially in the last couple of years, especially in the last year. And my wife, who has just retired and moved with me to New Mexico, she was a professor too in Utah, and I know she feels the same way. Both feel like we sort of escaped higher education in the academic world at a time when what we train to do doesn't seem to be entirely possible anymore, because there are too many political restrictions on what one can say in a classroom. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. What strikes me is, Lubbock obviously is a very conservative place, the buckle of the Bible Belt. I don't remember any limits on what our teachers taught us. They weren't trying to make us liberal, make us conservative. They just taught.
Yes.
And there was no academic interference in the classes I had. And I just wonder how those teachers are, kind of soldiering on in this atmosphere.
Well, my guess is everybody is probably lying low and trying not to get into trouble, hoping that this phase passes and something like true academic freedom returns at some point. But it's a scary situation. I know. I mean, I obviously still have lots of friends who are in the academic world, and my wife, Sarah, does as well. She was a department chair up until 2 years ago. And so she's still talking to the people who were in her department. And so, it's a scary thing to know about. And obviously what it means is you're limited by politics in being able to be honest in what you discover about the world. I mean, I feel to some extent, I wrote a piece for Time magazine about 6 months ago about this. I feel a certain constraint about even the sort of books I've been writing and telling stories. For example, what I just told about the bison, in Wild New World in particular, I tell how United States history basically produced the largest destruction of wild species of any country in the modern era. I mean, the passenger pigeon story is one that stands out, and you can't really deny it. These birds were the most numerous bird on Earth. They were in North America for 15 million years. And once Old Worlders arrived here, passenger pigeons didn't last 300 years before they became extinct. But I've worried that being able to write things like that in the sort of climate we're in, where we're told that everything has to celebrate American history, is, I have no intention of turning away from those kinds of stories, because in order to create the future you want, you have to tell stories about the past that guide us in how to avoid mistakes like that. But
and it has to be the real past, not some Hollywood version or fake one where everything the Americans did was awesome. I mean, growing.
Absolutely. It has to be the real world, the real past, the real history. And Teddy Roosevelt had a great line that I've used quite a bit in talks that I've done, where he said at one point, shortly after he became president, when he was attempting to institute laws to control some of the slaughter of wild animals and cutting down trees and just the haphazard, wasteful approach that capitalism was making on nature, Teddy Roosevelt said, a great nation needs to understand itself. And that is exactly what we have to do with history. A great country like the United States needs to understand itself and its history, because the whole focus of American history is that we weren't perfect to start with. We set a star in front of us to aim at. And that's where we're going. We're trying to create a more perfect union.
That's right. And we're trying to realize the ideals of the Declaration, and not just for men, but for all, men and women, and be our ideals. And if we don't live our ideals, there's almost no point.
One of the great things we've done as a country, and I think it speaks to who we are as a people, is we have continually expanded the circle of moral treatment wider and wider and wider. I mean, one of the things I talk about in this expansion is the Endangered Species Act of 1973, where we actually even expanded the circle of moral treatment to make sure that other creatures have the right to exist in America. And as you go back through American history, you can see, okay, we expanded the circle of treatment with the civil rights movement of the 1960s. We expanded it to include Native people who got the right to vote and became American citizens in 1924. We expanded it to give the women the right to vote. I mean, we have constantly done this in American history. It's who we are as a people. And I think that's the sort of interpretation of America that we all ought to aim for and all ought to hold close.
Yeah. There's something ironic that the group that calls itself America First today doesn't have those basic American principles.
I'm not sure that they actually understand them, which is a strange thing to say about other people's grasp of American history, but it sometimes seems that way to me.
No, that's how it feels. I have my son is an adult now, but I tell him that when we were growing up, the universe was expanding toward moral justice, that old quote, and his life has seen it start to contract.
Yeah.
And it's a real different view of the world. And I hope, especially the treatment of animals, which is something that people from all political groups can somewhat agree upon, that, we don't go backward on the wolf, we don't go backward on the coyote. And it seems like books like yours really point out the interaction between humans, the landscape, and the animals.
Well, I write these kinds of books because I want other people to understand these animals for what they really are and not go for a kind of a shorthand from the street version. I mean, one of the things I knew about coyotes when I was writing Coyote America was that even in the West, where people live among coyotes, a lot of people had never bothered to learn anything about these animals. And I knew as coyotes were expanding into the rest of the country, a lot of people in places like Chicago and New York City and Philadelphia and Atlanta were going to be seeing coyotes for the first time and not knowing the first thing about what to think about them. So the idea of writing a biography of this animal from its evolutionary origins and through its roller coaster biography down to the present day was very much dedicated to the idea of helping people understand who and what this animal really is. Because aside from us, I have to say, coyotes have probably one of the most fascinating stories of any creature in the whole American story. I mean, the coyote is the dude, and the dude absolutely abides.
On that note, this has been another Conversations Different. We'll be back next week. Thank you for listening to Conversations Different, hosted by me, Inez Russell Gomez, editorial page editor for the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our weekly episodes would not be possible without your support. We hope you enjoy them and keep listening. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Consider signing up for our newsletter so you never miss an episode, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our podcast is available by visiting our website, santafenewmexican.com/podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez is produced by Matt Dalside and Ernesto Cisneros, published by the Santa Fe New Mexican, a local and independent newspaper owned by Robin Martin.